when we talk about the feminine masculine, especially and I see this in organizations, is that there's a lot of, I would call it actually toxic feminine. Because you get these women in leadership and they're so masculine in their energy. There's to me as a woman, there's nothing feminine left in her often, right? And she's cutthroat. She does not share. She does not help other younger women rise within the organization. And I experienced that firsthand. And I've spoken to so many women saying the same thing. It was never the woman that helped me get up. It was always some other man.
Remember, adversity is your advantage.
Hey friends, welcome back to an amazing episode of the CEO Show with your host, Bryce Henson, a show dedicated to teaching leadership, promoting capitalism, and defending free speech. And I have an awesome guest, my dear friend, Miss Unni Turrettini. Unni, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Bryce.
I am so excited. You are my first international guest coming all the way from Oslo, Norway, here in Southern California. So welcome to the States. Super pumped to have you here in California.
I'm so happy to be here. I love it here in the States. This is kind of like my place, you know, where I feel home. Yeah.
Well, I know you studied abroad here. English is perfect. I'm so grateful for that because as we were talking off camera, my Norwegian is not existent with the exception of tak, which I just learned is thank you. But in any case, I digress. Let's kick it off and just give our audience a little bit of backstory. So what do you do and how did you get to doing what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a former attorney, actually, international corporate attorney by training. And so I kind of fell into this whole human connection, advocacy, being a writer, speaker, speaking about it, writing about it, kind of by coincidence and a little reluctantly too. We had this horrific incident in Norway in 2011 where this mass killer, Anders Breivik, killed 77 people in one day. And I wasn't living in Norway back then. I was living in Switzerland. But that was just such a shock to us as Norwegians. And, you know, we're a small country, so 77 people, that's a lot of people.
What's the population in Norway?
About 5 million.
5 million. Yeah. So we're here in Los Angeles, the greater Los Angeles, like 20 million. That just gives you some perspective.
Yeah.
So I would imagine you're not living in Norway at the time,
yeah.
But obviously you see this in 2011, and this is obviously a big eye-opening experience for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just needed to know, I had to know how that could happen, how someone who looked like me, could have been my younger brother, could do something as horrific as this. And because out of the blue, like he didn't have, he went to the same sort of school system. We grew up close enough to one another. I didn't know him, but I just didn't get it. And I followed his trial and I didn't get the answers that I was searching for. Nobody really explained how this could happen. And so I started looking I started researching myself really. Yeah. And I, dug into his past, into his psyche. He wrote a really long manifesto. So I really dove deep into that manifesto.
Did he commit suicide when this happened?
No.
Okay.
No. He's still alive today.
He is?
Yeah. And he got the maximum sentence in Norway, which is 21 years. So he's going to be out by the time he's 54.
Like in 2031 or something along those lines, roughly.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. How sad. So this happens. What do you make of it? What is the meaning? What's the big kind of eye-opening reason why this happened? And then how did this, adjust your work? And I'm kind of leading the witness here, but I love, what I know about you and from our connection is, you're a connection expert. You really value and cherish leadership, which is a huge pillar of this particular show. You're about connections and relationships, and this is all, fundamental in leadership. So what did you learn about that situation and how has it shaped your work?
Yeah, so I didn't know it back then that it would take me down this road, but I knew that I had to understand what happened there because if we can I'm a big believer that if we can understand something, then we can course correct, then we can prevent it from happening again. And with all the mass shootings in the U.S., it became very relevant.
Yeah.
So I studied these killers and then I wrote a book about it, The Mystery of the Lone Wolf Killer. And that book is published in the U.S. I have a New York publisher. And that's when I was thrown into speaking. My publisher wanted me to go out there and speak about the book and speak about this. So that landed me also in the news because whenever there was a mass shooting of a certain size or here in the U.S., then I would be called up by the media to give a comment about what was going on.
American media or Norwegian media?
Mostly American
Okay.
and British as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, and German as well. German, French.
Okay.
Yeah. Not so much in Norway, funnily enough, because over there, they didn't really want to talk about why.
Really?
Because, and this is something that I write about in my book, is that we as a culture we have a big responsibility when something like this happens.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't become a mass shooter, nobody's an island, right? It takes more than just one person to go to such extremes.
Yeah.
So, and what I found is that all these mass killers around the world, didn't really matter where in the world they were living or their background, they all struggled with loneliness.
That was a
Yeah.
common principle.
Yeah.
In all of these.
Now, there were some
instances.
other elements too, but that was really the one that really stood out. They
Yeah.
didn't feel like they belonged in our society. And I knew that feeling. I recognized that in myself. I moved around a lot as a kid because of my dad's work. And I also lived abroad. I never really felt like I belonged in Norway, because you have to be the same. You have to fit into this little box that they decide that you're going to be like this.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to dress like this. You're going to talk like this. You're going to think like this. You're going to, everything is decided for you. And I never felt that I fit into that little box.
That's like the culture, would you say?
Yeah, that's the culture.
And when did you start, I guess, having these feelings?
From when I was very little. Actually,
Since you can remember?
Since I can remember.
Really?
I felt like that. And the shooter in Norway, Anders Breivik, he felt that too. And when I discovered that, like, wow, he went to those extremes. He actually murdered 77 people. Mm-hmm. To kind of just get out his frustrations in a way. And I left Norway. So I left for most of my adult life. I lived in the US, I lived in Switzerland, I lived in France. And so we took completely different paths.
Sure.
I became sort of this high achiever. It's funny because I saw this former CIA agent who talked about that recently, that when the CIA recruits people, he said it takes a certain degree of trauma for someone to become a high achiever. And the CIA wants those high achievers. And that made me think that, yeah, I could be one of those people. But most leaders and successful people in the world,
Mm-hmm.
when you look into their backgrounds, they have that same element of childhood trauma, enough to make you a high achiever. And why do we become high achievers? Because we don't believe we're worthy. So we have to constantly prove to ourselves in the world that we are worthy. And so I digress. But
well, Unni, you're speaking to me because I would say I'm a self-proclaimed high achiever. But it's interesting. I always, and I shouldn't say always in the last 10 years, I'm trying, what's the root? And being very honest and vulnerable, there's at times where I think it's an overcompensation for some void. So not only are you speaking to your audience, but you're speaking to me. So continue on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Anders Breivik, the mass killer in Norway, he has that too. Very intelligent, very very sensitive. So things hurt him a lot, hurt him easily. He constantly needed to prove himself, but nobody was there to listen. He never felt heard, seen, and valued, not in our culture in Norway. And so he was seeking outside of that. And that kind of pushed him into extremism. Mm-hmm. It pushed him into this trying to find other groups that maybe would accept him. But funnily enough, even there, he wasn't really accepted. Because when you grow up with these kinds of attachment issues from early childhood that he had, and that I also have to a certain degree. And I think that that's what that CIA agent he was aiming for, was those, you grow up, you're kind of, you weren't seen, heard, and valued for who you really are. And that may not be anybody's fault, or it might be everybody's fault, like our culture. And then when you grow up like that and you just try to fit in, you try to make something out of it, and you try to make meaning out of things. And then you start, when you come to his level, then you start blaming. You start blaming populations or for him, he was blaming the Muslims. The Muslims were taking over Europe and taking over Norway. And so he made that his enemy number one, and also the Norwegian leadership government for allowing this to take place, to happen in his eyes. So he felt that he needed to kill Norwegian leadership and the Norwegian government. That was his aim with his massacre. Really, he aimed that teenage summer camp that was the future leadership of Norway.
Oh,
that
how
he aimed,
sad.
Killing all those kids.
That was his channel on how to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So when you uncover this, and I'm paraphrasing your words, you understood and started, having a fascination and research around like, okay, how did this happen? Why this happened?
Yeah.
And not only for Anders, which is the name of the gentleman who sadly massacred 77 people, but you started studying other, people in the same realm.
Yeah.
And you identified that loneliness was a majority or at least a big common factor in it all.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. The opposite of loneliness is connection. It's, human connections. It's building relationships, which obviously has a big leadership framework. So that was the foundation. How do we bridge the gap then? What's the solution for loneliness? How do we create more connection? How does that show up in leadership? How does it show up in business?
Yeah. And that is a great question, and something that we're struggling with right now in our society, because we've never been more disconnected. We've never been lonelier than we are today. And the U.S. Surgeon General, was just last year in 2023, he said that loneliness is our current epidemic. And I'm saying this is our current pandemic. This is not just this is everywhere. 1 in 4 people in the world right now is dealing with loneliness. Here in the United States, it's 1 out of 2, half the country.
Really?
That's huge.
Yeah.
And so it hasn't gotten better since Anders Breivik. That was 2011. It hasn't gotten better. We haven't understood as a society, leadership hasn't understood that people are feeling lonely and disconnected. And it's in big part, it's the fault of leadership, because they haven't managed to make people feel seen, heard, and valued, right? That is why we have this polarity in our culture right now.
Yeah.
And people are, and especially after the COVID pandemic, we were isolated, we were forced into isolation.
Yep.
And people losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods, creating despair. And when you force people into isolation, there's something that happens in our psyche. There's something that is then broken in us. And when we are separated for a longer period of time, what happens in the brain as well is that we lose those connections. This is neuroscience. So we lose the things that we don't use. It's like your high school German, right? Like my high school German. I can't remember like a thing, right? Almost. And because I'm not using it. Same thing with social connections. If we're not using them and maintaining them and strengthening our skills in social connection, we lose it. And then what we do, instead of going out and seeing people when that's what we really need to do, we stay home, we retract. Yeah, we withdraw. Exactly. So in our culture right now, what we're seeing is that people are disengaged.
Let me interject just to get a clarifying question, because I'm so fascinated with the fact that, you've had a lot of institutional knowledge. You lived in the States. When you talk about society and being polarized, I'm viewing that from an American lens. And I would say, here in the States, going through the last 5 years, the pandemic, et cetera, very polarizing, very isolated. So I'm curious, do you have that same feeling? Is that the same framework in Europe and Norway as well? Or in the United States, are you kind of viewing us as, more isolated in that particular experience?
I think we are as polarized elsewhere as well, outside of the U.S. as well. It's just that over here, you have an opposition who have the courage. They have the courage to voice their opinions to a bigger degree than we do in Europe.
Really?
Because Europe is very conform, especially Scandinavia, Norway.
Yep.
You don't really dare to speak your mind to the same extent that you do here. Right?
Yeah,
so you might feel that you can't, when we have the cancel culture, right?
Yeah.
And it's strong here as well.
Yeah.
But in Norway, for example, if you dare to voice and to express your opinions that are not what you are supposed to think and say, then they just freeze you out. for good.
In terms of like cancel culture, censorship?
Yeah. Censorship in terms of, friends, family, job,
Just the culture in general.
Just the culture in general. So people are more afraid to voice their opinion in cultures like that, where it's really, and it really goes back to just survival. You cannot survive outside of the group.
So for me, it's interesting, and I'm, a student of the world, and I like to learn from the different cultures and people. I'm very fascinated in this. One of the pillars of the show, one is leadership, right?
Yeah.
Teaching leadership, which is so important. I feel like there's a void in leadership, throughout the world, but even here from the States. And there are a lot of different ways you can look at leadership. For me, I look at fitness as leadership, right? Yeah. And 80% of our country here in the States is either obese or statistically obese, overweight, which is a massive leadership issue, first and foremost. The show also promotes capitalism, which at the foundation is freedom. And then lastly is free speech. So, in a situation like Norway, where there's more conformist type of kind of philosophy, where does free speech play? Because I'm in the firm belief that it's absolutely critical. And one of the things I've seen since COVID, it's probably been around for a while, but since COVID, there is this cancel culture. This is their censorship, which I believe is very dangerous. And if you look at, human culture, human civilization, tyrannical governments have, sprung up because of a cancel culture, because of a censorship. So that's a concern for me. So I guess I'm curious on your viewpoint, and then what's the solution?
So I'm a big believer in free speech. I believe and as an attorney, I've studied constitutional law. I've studied that in law school. I've studied law in Norway, France, and the United States. So, and I'm a member of the New York Bar. So I know a little bit about the systems in different places. And without free speech, we don't have democracy. Mm-hmm. And without free speech, we don't have freedom of information. If we don't have information so that we can actually form an opinion about something and make sound and reasonable decisions, we have nothing.
Right.
Then we don't live in a democracy.
Right.
And so for me to even think about that we're going to define hate speech, that, you can't say this and you can't say that because that will offend or hurt some group or some people. To me, that is destroying our democracy. Because who gets to decide, right?
I was about to say, because that's the one thing. And of course, like human nature, we're good people. We don't want to see someone degrade someone. I mean, that's not something anyone wants to see, especially good people. So we're not promoting that, but it becomes a very slippery slope and a very dangerous slope to say, hey, this is hate speech or this isn't hate speech. How do you even define that?
Yeah.
So I guess, what does that look like from your lens?
Yeah. So, and we saw that especially during the pandemic, when if you just dared question what the government told you to do and not to do, and it just some of the things were just really irrational. Did you feel that? I mean, I definitely have this viewpoint for sure in the States, and if you ask the average American, they would tell you the same thing. Right. Was that the same in Norway? Oh yeah. Oh really? Yeah. And you were ridiculed and frozen out if you just dared raise the question, even if you didn't say that, I don't believe in whatever you're doing. Just raising the questions like, why are we doing this again? Right. Which is like critical thinking. It's very important. Absolutely. So it's and all the old, and those were reasonable questions too, because there actually were protocols in place that were signed agreements between countries that had been in place, I believe, since 2014, if not earlier, that clearly stated that we were not supposed to be isolated because isolation is more dangerous for our health than the actual virus. And that's what just crushed me. Yeah. The especially specifically here in the U.S., like our government gave recommendations that were in the exact opposite of what you'd want to do to live a healthy and fit lifestyle. Yeah. Isolate from a mental perspective, right? Yeah. In terms of limiting your mobility, you need to be able to move and get fresh air and, ultimately, get vitamin D, the sun. These are all things that are very important to your physical well-being, but also mental well-being as well. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was the quote unquote medicine was worse than the cure, if that makes sense. I'm saying that right. It makes total sense. Yeah. And I see that from a human connection perspective because we are so much more lonely now and disconnected now, and people are people are feeling hopeless. And when, coming back to the whole sort of workplace leadership and where we are in our society, we're seeing that in the workforce. I believe it's something like 70% of people are unhappy at work. They're disengaged. 80% are disengaged. It's not a, we're not in a great place right now. And companies are suffering because people are less productive, right? When they are in this state.
Totally.
And that is because we are disconnected. We are disconnected from ourselves. And I just want to point out, because you talked about fitness, which is so important because it is leadership.
I do.
Leadership it starts with self-leadership. You have to, be a leader of your own body, of your own mind, right? Before you can do anything else outward. So that is the first thing on the agenda.
We are very aligned. In fact, my leadership framework is lead yourself, lead your family, lead your business empire.
Yeah.
But it starts with you.
Yeah.
You need to be able to lead yourself.
Yeah.
So, Unni, from your lens then, what's, we're clearly aligned. Our audience, either watching this or viewing this, can certainly relate to the events that have happened since 2020 and probably before that. What are some strategies or some solutions on how to divulge ourselves from loneliness, how to create better connection? Because that's really the solution from a mental, health perspective, but also from a leadership lens, from an organizational lens. Everything works better when we're connected, we're in flow.
Yeah.
And the opposite is also true. So what are some strategies and takeaways that you can have for our audience? And whether they're listening this and thinking from just a personal framework, or they want to be a better leader for their business, they're an entrepreneur, maybe they want to be an entrepreneur, start a company. What are some strategies that our audience can start making better connection?
Yeah, so we know that we need connection. The solution is simple. We just need more connection, right? And then the question is, but how do we do that? We're all surrounded by people today. We have friends, we have colleagues, we have families, yet we are still lonely. So there's something missing. And the first thing to do in this situation is to ask ourselves, why are we still disconnected when we have people around us? It should be so easy to just reach out.
It's
right?
interesting because it's like this dichotomy to that point. And we'll talk a little about social media as well, because in one way I feel like we're so connected. And compared to human history, we are the most connected. We've been dialoguing. You're in Norway. I'm in LA. Now you're here in LA today. But it's just unbelievable what technology can do from a connection point. Yeah. But that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is we're still also facing this like deep disconnection as well. Yeah. So it's just this like dichotomy, if you will. Yeah. So continue on.
So for me, the first thing to do, the first strategy is to help people get out of survival mode. Because most of us are in survival mode, in fight or flight, 70% of the time. And when we're in survival mode, just think about that. When you're feeling that stress and that overwhelm and we don't even notice that we're in survival, it happens so quickly. What happens is that parts of our brain is just shut off. We don't have access to it, because what's important when you are either thinking of fighting, an enemy or running away from it, well, you either the body goes into, we have a prehistoric brain, right? That will either, will protect the body and prepare you to either fight, flight, or freeze.
This is like survival, limbic system.
This is survival, basic survival. Yeah. But what happens then is that everything else is shut off. So the frontal lobe part of our brain, we don't have access to it.
Which is really what makes us human.
It's the CEO of our life.
Yeah.
It's where we make decisions. It's where we can think. It's where we can take a step back, look at the big picture and see, okay, what's the best thing here to do right now? Like, what would be good for me to do right now that would take me to where I want to be in 5 to 10 years?
And that part of the brain, which is so mission critical, is shut off. And your limbic, your survival, fight or flight, is navigating, you said 70% of the time.
Yeah. And most people are in that state right now. And in survival mode, connection is off the table. Open your heart, connecting with someone, it's off the table. Collaboration is off the table. And we become suspicious of other people. We see potential threats all around us in that state. We get tunnel vision. We try to control every outcome. And, to get to where we want to go, we try to manipulate, we force outcomes, we fight for them, because we have lost the ability to think creatively and to see, possibilities that are there, but we don't see them. So that's where we, unhealthy competition, all of that. Competition is good, but not in this setting. So that's where we are when we look at our population right now, and this is really interesting, especially right now, because when we're in that state, when we're feeling lonely, suddenly the danger that we're responding to can show up looking like our spouses, our partners, our kids, our your boss, your mother-in-law. It's really that simple. And we can't help it. It's a physiological response. And so we have to teach ourselves and help other people deactivate this survival mode so that we can actually connect with ourselves and have a chance at connecting with someone else. That's where we need to start. And that's what when I hold workshops for companies and trainings, that's where we start. We start with the survival mode and teaching them simple tools of how to deactivate it.
And then really access your neocortex so that way you can actually create connection, create relationships, be vulnerable. Because that's where collaboration and teamwork, leadership, results in profitability.
Make better decisions. Yeah.
So let's dive into the social media topic, which I kind of flirted with a little bit. But it's interesting. It's this dichotomy because we're so connected and it's such a valuable tool. You might be watching or listening to this on social media right now, which is super valuable. But on the other side of the coin, it can have a dark side, if you will, which is probably true about most things in life. So what's your view on social media as it pertains to connection, to loneliness, the loneliness epidemic? And we'd just love some of your feedback there.
Yeah. So, I think during the COVID pandemic, I think the fact that we could connect with one another through Zoom or social media or just our phones was very important, right? Like we need that tool too. It is a tool for connection, right? But it can also make us feel more disconnected when what we're following, when what we're watching makes us feel like we're inadequate. Like we have failed at social connection because everyone else seemed to be so happy. They have their lives all, figured out. They have their families and their friends and everything looks so good.
Right.
But behind the scenes, and that was something I actually shared a short reel on Instagram a little over a year ago. Just like short clips from my life, just like that I'd taken like with my kids and family and everything looking really good on the outside. And then I was like sharing the story how dissatisfied and disconnected and lonely I felt, even though I had it all. And that reel got 1 million views, more than 1 million views.
Really?
Because people resonated. I received hundreds of messages from people all over the world telling me that felt the same thing, that just didn't know how to put the words to it. And so I think that if we can share stories like that on social media, then we actually create connection, because that triggered something in so many people, that just this little reel that I put out showing that, it looks like I have it all, but I don't, and even I can feel lonely and disconnected and dissatisfied. And I don't know why. I don't know how to figure it out. Like just sharing that is powerful, because people then feel seen, heard, and valued. If we can make people feel seen, heard, and valued through social media, then we have made it, right? And also, I also have to say that coming back to the whole freedom of speech and information, social media is also crucial to getting information today because of our media situation, the mass media situation. Like I can't remember right now, but there's like the level of trust in different institutions are the lowest.
Like zero.
Is like zero.
Maybe I'm speaking for myself, but probably true for a lot of people.
I think it's like less than 15% trust in mass media, right? Around the world.
Yeah.
And that says a lot about, and so we have to be able to get information, and social media has been crucial in that way. Now, of course, social media can also be misused by, certain governments, perhaps, like who knows, can misuse social media to give us, information that is not true, perhaps, right? So it's hard to know. It's really hard to know. It's really hard to navigate. But it becomes even harder when you censor.
Right. And I think for me, and then you just hit a chord, and I want to hear more from you, but there can be a lot of bad information, not accurate information.
Yeah.
But if you create an environment where you're blocking certain information, then you really have no gauge. So at the end of the day, it's from my lens and my strong belief, it's a very productive situation to have all sorts of information out there, because I believe in human nature. I believe in our ability to critically think and be able to process information. Okay, what's accurate, what's not. And yeah, it can be hard, but human nature eventually, when you have a lot of ideas out there, will eventually filter through, and the good ideas will rise, the bad ideas will fall. The opposite is also true if you're only allowed access to a certain amount of ideas. Eventually what happens with time, bad ideas rise to the top and good ideas die. And if you need any proof of that, you can just look at history, because it's littered with tyrannical governments, tyrannical companies, etc., that have really pressed the issue here.
Yeah. And we look at Russia and North Korea and these places and think of them as, horrible places where because they do not have freedom of speech and freedom of information, and that the media is totally government propaganda, right? I mean, how different are we really how different are we really here and in Norway and everywhere else, when we censor and, when it's really the government and financial institutions who decide what they will publish in the media? Well,
Unni, this is why I'm on my pulpit right now in this podcast, because I never thought, like when I read the book by Unni Park. She's written 2 books. She's a North Korean defector, only one of 200 that has made it to the States. Yeah. And she wrote a book on, her life and her journey. The first part was her journey escaping to China, eventually to the United States. And her second part was actually her life here for the last 10 years and going to university. And she saw a lot of parallels, which was really like eye-opening to me, because I'm thinking, okay, North Korea, Russia, China, like that would never happen here. But Unni, what I saw is it has happened here. And for me, that's a terrifying thought. That's a very scary thought. Yeah. And if you study any sort of, tyrannical regime, in fact, we were talking this offline, the first time I have Polish lineage, I went to Poland in August last year of 2023 and, learned about the Holocaust and went to Auschwitz, the, most deadly and famous death camp. Yeah. The first thing that the Nazi German government did was censor media. But of course, they didn't censor it and showcase how it's a bad thing. They talked about the positives and why they're doing this, that, and the other. But as the telltale sign to things going south really bad. And it showed up in American shores, on American borders here. And this is why I'm so passionate to be able to create a platform that we talk about this. Yeah. And if you don't agree with me, great. Yeah, that's great.
Exactly.
I want us to be able to have conversations and work things through, because as I mentioned, to reiterate the point, when you create an environment, I look at things from a leadership framework, because I love leadership, I love teamwork, I love connection, all the things that you fight for. When you have an environment where you're able to share good ideas and bad ideas, eventually human nature, good ideas will rise to the top. Yes. And you have the ability to combat and debate and battle these out. Where if you have a situation of censorship and of secrecy, then eventually what happens, bad ideas rise and good ideas die. And maybe you've never lived in a tyrannical government. Hopefully you haven't in North Korea or China, et cetera. But you've also probably been, if you're listening or watching this, in an environment with a leader that, you had to walk on eggshells. Yeah. It's the same type of thing.
Same thing.
And I think for me, going back to your point, I want to hear more on this. Like, it really, really opened my eyes and scared me over the last handful of years of seeing that censorship and that quote unquote cancel culture show up at our borders. And this is why I'm passionate to, having rebranded the show earlier this year from the Fitness CEO podcast now to the CEO show, where we teach leadership, we promote capitalism, and we support and defend free speech. And if you break those things down, all three have freedom, which is really my core value, which I'm here to share with the world.
That's right. And without the media as a separate power, as a watchdog, right, of our governments and leadership, we do not live in a democracy.
Right.
So we need media. And this is why I think it's so, that podcasts have become such a big deal and important, that people are, I'm just for myself, I'm listening more to podcasts and I'm seeking out these other alternative ways of getting information through conversations that I listen to, right, with people where
Like-
you don't need to agree
Right.
always.
But two people connecting.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And
Two people
they're so
connecting.
valuable.
Yeah. And so in this day and age with media being so controlled and distrust in institutions and media and leadership, podcasts and social media is essential
Agreed.
more than ever.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right, I want to go back, and we're kind of going through a few topics, which is absolutely great, just fascinating and fires me up. But we talked a little bit about the subject of polarity. And normal, and when I hear this, and most people think it's a bad thing, which in many ways it is. However, I follow your content, and there was a piece of content, probably a few pieces of content. You talked a little bit about relationships, connection,
Yeah.
actually masculine energy and feminine energy, and how that polarity is a good thing.
Yeah.
And I could not agree with you more, because there's differences physiological, okay, in human beings, in males, in females. And I think those differences are good things and
Yeah.
they need to be celebrated. And something I learned from you is that polarity is actually what makes the relationship work.
Yeah.
So, you know, in a general context, obviously polarity can be seen as a bad thing, but in this particular context, I think it's a good thing. And I want to uncover that a little bit, because as a topic, especially specifically, there's this kind of buzzword of toxic masculinity. And I don't even know what that is. Of course, I understand kind of the general, you know, theme of that. And when I look at that, yeah, there's some guys that are jerks and they're hard-headed and they're not good people. That's one thing, of course, right? But we're not talking about that. We're talking about their physiological differences in masculine energy, in feminine energy, how they're both positive and how they work together. And from a connection perspective, I'd love just your take on it. And if you could, explain a little bit more.
Yeah, because relationships are a crucial part of connection, right? I talk a lot about the connection to self, you know, in relationship to self, but in relationship with other people, and especially between men and women, I think it all ties together with how lonely and disconnected we are as a culture right now. And you know, I'm all for equal opportunity, right, for everyone.
Totally, yeah.
I don't care about your skin color, your gender, whatever. You know,
Totally.
don't care about that. But that we all have equal opportunity, and I think we all agree on that.
Yeah.
But what the at least part of the feminist movement has done is to make women want to be like men, and I've seen that. I've worked in the very sort of male. I worked for a Wall Street law firm. I worked in corporate finance, you know, in financial institutions. Being a minority, being a woman in that world, I saw when this happened, when the women that were there, they behaved like men. They became just men, just
Right.
with a skirt,
Right.
and long hair.
And I mean, there's so many problems with that.
So many problems.
I'm curious on your take
Yeah.
on what those are.
And we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
And how so?
Because what has happened in our culture today is that we're supposed to be so independent, right? As women, we've lost that. We have demasculated men by becoming so masculine as women.
Right.
Because what happens, and that's the polarity, is what happens when a woman becomes very masculine is that her man will become less masculine.
Right.
So he will become then more feminine. And so it equals out. So you have two people who are basically the same.
Neutral.
Neutral.
Yeah.
There's no attraction.
Yeah.
No attraction anymore. And so as a woman, I think what we've lost in that whole feminist movement is to see what a woman really is, and that being a woman and being feminine is actually really powerful.
It's a great thing.
It's a great thing.
And
Why do we have to become like men?
Right. And I'm just kind of processing from my own life and my own experiences. My wife, Tatiana, will kind of use her an example when I look at this. She is an amazing soul. She's so capable. She speaks 2 languages fluently. You speak 3, and your husband speaks 8, which is amazing. But digress. But she's very capable. She runs businesses. She runs gyms. She's just like an independent, awesome chick. but she's feminine, and I want her to be feminine.
Yeah.
If she was like carrying around masculine energy, I'm like, no, I don't want any of that. That's not attractive to me. So it's two things can be true. She can be all these things that I just articulated, but she can also be feminine, and that is, I believe, is a good thing. And just like me, I can, be caring and attentive and, develop in the relationship, but my energy can't change into feminine energy. She's not going to find that attractive, and eventually a relationship is going to break down. So I guess what I'm trying to do is validate what you said from my own perspective, but what I also see and believe in our society.
I mean, 40 to 60% of all first marriages end in divorce, right? 40 to 60%.
I know that's in the States. Is that, in Europe?
I think it's everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah, everywhere. And that just says a lot, right?
Yeah.
Because what happens too is that when we're not valuing each other for our true nature. And we are different.
And
we
that's
should
what it
celebrate
is.
the fact that we are different.
Yeah.
And so I hear a lot of women talking about, and this is all over social media as well, talking about this toxic masculinity and how complaining that men don't talk about their feelings and emotions and all that. That is a feminine thing to do. Do not expect your man to want to talk about his feelings and emotions for hours and hours. Talk to your girlfriends if you want to do that.
Amen. Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that a man can't be sensitive and also emotional and have all those emotions too, because they do. But we shouldn't expect them to be, if you want a girlfriend, get a girlfriend. But don't expect your man to be that girlfriend, right? Because what happens is that your man will then stop taking care of you. And what women also want, and I know this, all women want this, they want to have a strong man that they can lean, against and trust and be that protector and also take care of you. But we have to allow them to do it, right? So we can be the best business women, we can run business, we can do all those things, right?
Yeah.
But when we come home, then, don't make all the decisions.
Yeah.
Let your man make some of this, some decisions, right?
Sure.
And don't expect him to be the second woman of the house, taking care of everything in the house like we can, because we are really good at, and I see this just with my husband, like I'm very good, and I see this with all of my women friends, very good at planning everything out, organizing, like setting like who does what, like all the things like this. We can do that. We're very good at that.
Typically speaking, very strong at that.
Right?
Yeah.
And my husband, at all.
Right.
Like, not at all.
Right.
Like, he can't find the bread in the drawer,
Him and I both. So
right.
we're kindred spirits there.
Exactly. And that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And it's okay. But he has other things that I don't have, right? So allowing ourselves to do what we are good at and then just allowing the other person to be too. And we want men to be masculine.
Yes.
And I think that, I said this, and this is very provocative to a lot of people. I often say that there's nothing worse today than being a man, especially if you're white and somewhat privileged. And I'm just thinking of my own son, right? Growing up and going out into he's 16 now, is going out like soon to college and getting a job and all that. And who's going to want him, right?
It's crazy.
Like, if you don't have some sort of disability or, other skin color or, some
box to check.
Yeah. Or some gender fluid kind of thing or whatever, nobody wants you. So, and I mean, I know that that's not true. Like, I'm saying that also to provoke, but there is a little truth to that.
There is.
And we want men to be men and for them to not have to be women-like and talk about their feelings all day long. Men have other ways of processing their emotions. They go out, they shoot some hoops or go for a run or, have a beer with a friend, whatever.
Totally.
And can do that.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Let them.
So, Unni, how does that show up? And we're talking more from the personal dynamic as well. How does that show up from a leadership framework, an organizational framework, when you coach, leaders and organizations for better teamwork and, more connection? Where does this particular piece show up in your teaching and your understanding from an organizational leadership lens? Yeah.
So when we talk about the feminine masculine, especially and I see this in organizations, is that there's a lot of, I would call it actually toxic feminine. because you get these women in leadership and they're so masculine in their energy. There's to me as a woman, there's nothing feminine left in her often, right? And she's cutthroat. She does not share. She does not help other younger women rise within the organization. And I experienced that firsthand. And I've spoken to so many women saying the same thing. It was never the woman that helped me get up. It was always some other man, some leader,
Sure.
So, and now with this whole, after the Me Too movement, and it's really, we need mentorship in organizations if we want to get also women up in leadership. And men today are afraid to mentor younger women because of the Me Too movement. So again, we've shot ourselves in the foot. I mean, it's not to say that, sexual harassment, all that, it's not okay, right?
Yeah,
I'm not
No.
I'm not condoning that at all.
No, not at all.
But we need to allow men to be men, and also, so what if there's a little flirtation? It's
a little part of nature.
It's part of nature as well.
That's actually a word that you used that I just latched on, because there's a natural element to physiology, to the world, that you need to honor.
Yes.
Because if you don't honor nature, eventually suffering happens.
And that's that tension again between polarity between the sexes. And we need it. And it's actually a good thing. Because a lot of good things, creativity, it's a good dynamic to have in the workplace too. So there's a lot of that toxic feminine that I work with women with, right? Because they are also unhappy in that position.
Yeah, you got to think, because it's taken to an extreme, and then that's not naturally for them. It's not natural for anyone. And if you operate out of nature for an extended period of time, suffering happens, like unhappiness happens. That's not a good situation for them either.
They're divorced. They can't get a man.
Right.
They're unhappy in their personal lives and with their kids too. And they're also unhappy at work because they, nobody likes them. You become that sort of abrasive leader. Now, of course, not everyone, but there's a little bit of that in a lot of them. So there's definitely that. And then in terms of, I think every organization today need to become communities for connection. We need to think of the workplace in a different, it's not just a place to work. It's actually a center for connection and community.
Let's talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
especially an entrepreneur framework. And it's interesting, Unni, I've had two major careers over the last 20 years. One has been, overseeing my Fit Body Bootcamp brand, starting as a franchise partner in 2012, opening a handful of locations, then eventually becoming the vice president, now the CEO. It's very fitness focused, but it's very community-based focused, not only from our headquarters perspective, but our individual independent operators throughout North America. They have their fitness business and they're training their clients, but they're building a community around that. My previous company was a career development program where I learned sales, I learned connection, but also there was a big community aspect at play. And I think community has been a really big part of my entrepreneur journey, and a lot of very successful, companies. In fact, as an example, my business partner, Bedros Koulian, and other business partner, Jay Redman, launched a program called the Legacy Tribe Coaching Group, which is a program for men and women that want community, that want connection, that want physical and mental transformations. And I feel like there's just so much in community. We're wired from a human nature. So I look at it from a business and entrepreneur lens, and would just love to kind of open up and get some of your thoughts on how, the audience can have better insights on how to leverage community, not only to be happier, but also be more successful from a business lens.
Yeah. Connection is what we live for. It's without connection, we are nothing. And also connection, when we are connected, we feel connected, we feel like we belong, we become successful too. Without that, we cannot succeed, right? Again, that survival mode, that we go into when we don't feel connected. And for entrepreneurs, and being an entrepreneur myself, it's been a struggle. And I think we have to seek out community, even if we are working for ourselves as entrepreneurs. And for me, it's been crucial to be part of masterminds, to seek out, communities like that. And also, I'm a coach and trainer as well, but I have my own coaches and trainers. And I don't know where I would be without them, right? So we have to seek mastermind communities, and also to have our own coaches and trainers in all areas, like in fitness, in just, mental training.
In alcoholism, and this is something you probably not know, but our audience probably knows at this point, but I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I joined a 12-step program in early 2017. I stopped drinking alcohol at the end of December 2016, and a big part of that is actually the community involved. And it's interesting, it's wild actually, the 12-step program, it's a bunch of people that have the same exact problem. There's not a sober person teaching about how to do this strategy or that strategy and how to be sober. It's a bunch of people that have the same allergy of alcohol that I do. We go around the room and we connect and we bond and we engage. Yeah. And ironically, it's like therapeutic. I feel understood, and it's helped me be sober from alcohol for, going on 7 years now.
Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you. But going back to community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's I can't remember who said that now, but he's a famous author, British, and he said that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection.
From my own experience, I can validate that. Because interestingly enough, Unni, like for the longest period of time, and I admire you for when you heard about the horrific tragedy in 2011, your initial thought was, well, wow, he feels lonely. I feel lonely too. There must be other people feeling this way. Yeah. Interestingly, I had a different thought with alcoholism. I thought I'm the only person that probably feels this way. Yeah. I felt isolated. I felt lonely. I felt like I was the only, and of course I knew that wasn't the case. My father's an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic. It's a genetic component. And there's a lot of other people that have problems with alcohol, but it wasn't until I stepped in the rooms and actually heard from other people that I felt like this loneliness went away, and the connection is actually what inspired me, and probably has been a huge aspect of keeping me sober since 2017 16.
Yeah. And what's really interesting about alcohol is because it's such a cultural thing, right? Yeah. In Scandinavia, we drink a lot, and because we're so disconnected. I'm sorry, Norwegians, but that's the truth. Yeah. But really, what it is, it's so hard, and I feel this because I drink, but just like very rarely, and hardly any anymore, and because I discovered in my own search for connection and overcoming loneliness, when I drink, even just a glass, I disconnect from my own self. And when I'm disconnected from my own self, I cannot have fulfilling connection with someone else.
Amen.
And so, but what's so hard about the cultural aspect is that you go to a dinner party, and this happens to me all the time. I go there and they serve me a glass of wine, and I say, no, thank you, I'm not drinking. Oh, why are you not drinking? If you're not pregnant or you have you've had an illness,
totally.
It's not acceptable that you do not drink, because nobody wants to be alone in their own alcoholism. Ooh. Nobody wants to be alone in their own drinking. Totally. So they feel better if everybody else is as addicted as they are. So you have to be so strong in a culture like that to say, no, thank you, I'm not drinking.
And to that point, for the first year and a half, 2 years, I wasn't strong enough to go to those engagements because it's alcohol. It's one of the only drugs that you kind of get a weird look if you're not engaged. And it took me solid probably 18 to 24 months before I had enough confidence and connection with my support group where then I could go and handle that resistance. So it was a process, but I'm living proof of what you just the story that you just painted. Because
alcohol is the only socially acceptable addiction, right? And I think more people than not who drink alcohol are actually addicted to it. It's just that they don't want to look at it that way. They're like, oh no, I can stop anytime. Yeah, really? Like, do you like? Not sure. Not so sure. But because when you come to those social settings, you're not strong enough to say no. To me, that's a problem. But it comes back to the connection piece, because all we want is to feel connected.
Well, it's interesting, too, and it's almost a little bit of facade, because I completely agree with you. When I did drink, on the surface level, it actually felt in the moment that I was connected. But then when I'd rerun the tape the day after, I was like, I didn't actually develop any sort of deep, meaningful conversation, deep, meaningful connection with anyone, even though in the moment, and obviously the effects of alcohol, I thought it did, but it actually left me feeling empty.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I go in now as a sober person to these same parties, same people, and when you're sober, you observe things, right?
Oh yeah.
And the conversations like throughout the evening, they're repetitive. They haven't learned anything new about the other person. They're just talking at each other, not really learning from each other,
Totally.
right? So it's super interesting. It's actually really fun to watch.
Yeah.
And it's really sad too, because there's no connection.
Very true. All right, this has been awesome. I'm just lit up and fired up of just enthusiasm and gratitude for you. Last topic that I want to dive into, and it's from a leadership framework, but it's trust. And it's interesting. This is something that you know a lot about. It's important in connection, in leadership. And it's interesting. This is something that I really, really admire and try to seek out trust in my relationships with my team and my organization that I run, Fit Body Bootcamp, my Legacy Tribe members. I mean, this is a vital part of my, I guess, leadership is ability to build trust. Now, in your second book, I believe, Betraying the Nobel, it was really about trust in leadership. So I want to kind of tee that up, specifically the book to give us more insight, but then just in general, I would love to hear some of your insights on the necessity of trust, the value of trust, and how our audience can develop more trust so they can better their leadership in their life. Yeah,
absolutely. So that book was inspired by the prize given to Barack Obama in 2009. That's when I mean, as a Norwegian, the Nobel Peace Prize is given out by Norway, right? By the Norwegian committee.
Yeah.
And so I grew up feeling so proud, right?
Yeah.
That, we're super cool because we give out the Peace Prize, right?
You guys do it.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is, probably the most prestigious prize in the world.
Yeah.
And covered by, basically every media in the world. And so when they gave it to Barack Obama in 2009, he had not, when they nominated him, he had been in office for less than 2 weeks. He hadn't done any of the things that the committee said he had done. He hadn't done them yet.
You said 2 weeks he was in office.
Less than 2 weeks, pretty much like 10 days or something. So, and then that's not to say anything negative about Obama, because it's just that no matter who you are, to be given the Nobel Peace Prize, you have to have actually done the things that they say you have done before.
Sure.
It's a prize to celebrate achievements, right?
Big achievements. So it's not a criticism of Obama. It's a criticism of the committee and their work. And that's when I started digging into the Nobel Peace Prize. And it took me a long time to write that book because there was a lot of research and, checking facts and all the things. But I started digging into all of the Nobel Prize winners since the inception of the prize in 1905. And so I have a pattern here. You find something like very intriguing, fascinating. You're like, I'm just going to dive in, learn as much as I possibly can, and share that to the world. Yeah. That'd be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. And what I found was, so I was looking at Alfred Nobel, who created the prize, and he was the inventor of dynamite. A lot of people thought that he set up all these prizes, the Nobel Prizes, because he felt bad for inventing dynamite, but that was not the case at all. He actually saw dynamite as helping humanity. He wanted to further humanity, building roads and tunnels and all sorts of things, which dynamite of course does.
Yeah.
So it wasn't supposed to be used as a weapon. Of course, it has been weaponized, but that was not his intention. And when he having studied him as well and read everything I could find about Alfred Nobel, what he wanted with his prize, with the Nobel Peace Prize, was to honor leaders who dare to stand out, who dare to speak up for those who cannot speak up themselves, who builds bridges between countries and people, and who promotes brotherhood between nations and people. Right? That's what the Nobel Peace Prize is supposed to be, and that is what we need in our society right now.
Amen.
More than ever. Right?
Yeah.
And so I started looking into all these prizes given out by the Norwegian committee, who, by the way, there are 5 people on the committee. They have been historically politicians. They've been selected by Parliament, Norwegian Parliament. So it's been You've been put on the committee as a pat on the back as a thank you for loyal service to the political party. And of course, then you get political decisions.
Yeah, there's a conflict of interest
There's
there. There's an opportunity for corruption. I mean, I'm just seeing this all in front of my eyes.
And so that's why I called it Betraying the Nobel, the secrets and corruption behind the Nobel Peace Prize, because that's what it is. Of course, Norway doesn't want to acknowledge my book. Again, it's given out in the United States, by my New York publisher, and received a lot of interest in it internationally. Nobody wants to speak about it in Norway because, of course, I'm taking down an institution, right? But I don't do it maliciously. I actually propose a lot of solutions in the book to the Nobel Peace Prize, and I believe to other institutions too, because sometimes we need to take down institutions if they're not working. And the problem with the Nobel Peace Prize as an institution is that, first of all, there's zero transparency, right? We live in a world today where we need transparency. If we're going to have trust,
of trust.
Yeah. We need transparency. We need to understand what are the motives behind how is the selection process, like how do they actually do this work, right? And then there is the definition of peace. They haven't really properly defined peace, at least not how they're using it now. So now basically it's whoever does something that we like, and we'll call it peace. Thank you very much. That's how, the Peace Prize is given today and has been given, for years, for decades. And so we need to there needs to be sort of certain perimeters. And then we need that in politics. We need that in governments. We need that everywhere.
Yeah.
And if we need, because we need that predictability. If governments and institutions can just change their own rules at a whim, then we're in trouble.
Big trouble.
Right?
Yeah.
So transparency and clear, defined rules about perimeters on how we do things. And so I think that is, and also, again, conflict of interest. You can't have the wolf looking over the sheep, right? So you have to, again, media. We need media to become the watchdog that it's supposed to be. So I'm talking a lot about that.
Well, and it also goes back to, transparency, trust,
the
ability to communicate, free speech. I mean, these all just ties together for, in my lens, human prosperity, which this is my mission, is to really help humans become better, become more prosperous, so we can live better lives and we can connect and live more harmoniously.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we all want that.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part, with this whole polarity that we have in our society, whether you vote for that party or the other party, we have to see what really behind those superficial issues. I call them superficial. That might be provocative to some people too, I know. But
it's okay. We're going to provoke a lot of people today. Let's go.
Yeah. But we have to be able to see beyond those superficial issues of differences and really what do we want. Same thing with the mass shooting situations. And I talk about, gun control and that sort of thing too. I'm not saying that we shouldn't control guns, but I think that whole gun control debate is just taking focus away from the real issues, which is disconnection and loneliness. Because it isn't, it's we all want to save our kids. We all
Amen.
Want freedom.
Amen.
We all want freedom to create, to build our own lives. And for that, back again to capitalism, that's why we need capitalism too. Because we have so much recent history proving to us that communism does not work.
Does not work. I mean,
why are we taking that direction?
Unbelievable. How many times did the experiment have to fail before we realize that capitalism is the way to go? It promotes freedom and human prosperity.
Yeah. And we all want that. We all want what's on the other side of that. So I think we need to be able to, again, and censorship is not helping. We need to be able to sit together, bring all the parties to the table and allow people a seat at the table, even if we strongly disagree and we think that they're talking hate speech, even those people. We need to allow them at the table and really listen to what is behind that. Because back to my guy, Anders Breivik, the mass shooter in Norway, when, if we had allowed him a seat at the table, and making him feel seen, heard, and valued, probably those 77 people would still be alive today. And that just makes me so sad.
Well, that's probably a very good segue to kind of wrap this up. But Unni, this has been incredible. I have one final question, being this is the CEO Show podcast and the Chief Executive Officer. So from your lens, what does it mean to be a CEO, Unni?
Oh, great question. And it's a big question, too. I think a CEO is a leader who takes responsibility, who has the courage to say, listen, I was wrong. I made a mistake. I'm going to right the ship. I'm going to do better. And how many leaders today say those words? So very few, right? So being big enough and having the confidence and self-leadership to be able to say that I was wrong and I made a mistake. And now that I know better, I'll do better. So I think that's the first thing of being a CEO. And then the second thing is really creating that place of community and trust within your organization. Because if you don't have connection within your organization, you have a sinking ship. So you have to build trust and be vulnerable. That, you mentioned vulnerability before that we haven't really spoken that much about, but vulnerability to show people that you're not perfect. Leaders today, and a lot of CEOs and people that I work with, they come to me, they think that, and research also show this, that most of them believe that if I show that I'm struggling, maybe at home, like if I show my struggles and share my, part of my struggles, people will not respect me. They will see me as weak. But the opposite is true.
Opposite is true.
Yeah. So we just have to get over ourselves and start sharing. That I'm not talking about emotional dumping. That's like when you sort of like just vomit your whole story to other people. That's not it. But sharing, like showing that you are actually human yourself and you make mistakes and ask your people for help. Say that, listen, I'm really good at this, but I'm not so good at that. So I'm going to need your help, my team. Like I'm going to need your help to help me with that part. And
people connect with that because we all need help. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. Yeah. And that vulnerability creates so much connection because we can resonate and empathize.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unni, this has been absolutely phenomenal. I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I want to give you a proper acknowledgement. Before I do, if this is the first time our audience has been able to connect with you, where can they find you? So
I'm on social media. I love LinkedIn and Instagram. So you can find me by my name. So Unni Turrettini. I know that's a long and difficult name. So it's UNNI, and then Turrettini is TURRETTINI. And if you just Google that, you will land on all my social media and website and everything.
Love it. And we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
I want to thank you, obviously, for being on the show, for making the trip all the way from Norway here to beautiful Southern California. But more than that, for your energy, for your authenticity, for your ability to connect and really lock onto something that will really help humanity, I think is so admirable. We're certainly very much kindred spirits. And I also want to acknowledge and thank you for your courage to be able to speak your truth. And you've taught me a lot of things today, and I certainly know your audience. So I want to thank you so much for being on the show and being for who you are.
Bryce, thank you so much for having me. It's really all my pleasure. Thank you.
All right, friends, I know you got amazing value from the episode. I would just ask you to like this and share this with someone in need. That would mean a lot to me and allow us to keep producing this awesome content for you for free. And remember, adversity is your advantage, and we'll see you in the next episode.